Hello everyone, it is Tsuki, and in this video I'm going to be sharing parts of my upcoming Astrologian guide. In this video I will be sharing the section of the guide where I will be talking about the cards, as well as the various abilities that will interact and manipulate your cards, and this is just going to be a standalone video. This section will be part of the full Astrologian guide, so if you go and watch the full guide later on, this section will definitely be in there. The reason why I'm going to go ahead and put this in its own video is because I feel like this is fairly vital for the Astrologian job, and I feel like for people who are just happening to stumble across this video, it'll be a lot more digestible than watching an entire full-length guide, and we all know how long my guides can get. So I decided I was going to go ahead and take that part of the guide, put it in its own video, so that maybe somebody who comes across it can go ahead and watch this, and if they enjoy this, they can go ahead and go watch the full video, the full guide should be ready within a couple of days at least, maybe a few if I take a little bit more extra time. If it is complete already, you can go ahead and check the description of the video or click the little eye icon in the top right of the video to go ahead and take you to the full guide where this section will be there as well. So yeah, weird introduction out of the way, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, we'll first talk about the cards you can obtain by using draw. Like we discussed earlier, when using draw, one of these 6 cards will replace draw on your hotbar and will remain there until used in some way or until the card wears off after 15 seconds. We'll first talk about the balance, which is arguably the most powerful and most desired card of the original 6. This will very simply increase the attack power of the party member you place it on by 10% and will last for 30 seconds by default. It really doesn't need much more explanation than that. This card is best given to your hardest hitting party members who are outputting the most DPS. The next card is the Bull. This will reduce the damage taken by a party member by 20% and lasts for 30 seconds. I feel like this card is fairly underrated as most Astrologians just want to fish for the offensive cards. As far as defensive utility goes, this is an extremely powerful card. This card, even without any extensions or Royal Road effects, acts as a longer lasting rampart, and it can be particularly useful when you need a little bit more breathing room and your tank is low on defensive cooldowns. It is also extremely strong when reducing damage during large pulls in dungeons. Next is the Arrow. This will decrease the cast and recast time of your skills and spells, and will also reduce the delay of your auto attacks, and will last for 30 seconds. This card is mostly used offensively. Similarly to the Balance, this will be best given to your hardest hitting DPS, but if given some close options, I tend to prioritize giving the Arrow to casters, namely Black Mages, as it allows to get their casts off with a little more ease. However, since the Arrow also decreases auto attack delay, giving this to a well-performing melee DPS is still a completely sensible choice. The Arrow is primarily used offensively, however you can use this a bit more defensively as well by giving it to yourself to allow yourself to cast your healing spells a little more quickly. In the majority of situations, however, this card is still best used in an offensive manner. The fourth card is the Spear. This will increase the critical hit rate of your chosen party member and will last for 30 seconds. This card is primarily an offensive card, however its effects are less tangible than the Balance or the Arrow. Still, it theoretically should increase the DPS of whomever you give it to. With the Spear, I find it most effective to prioritize giving these to jobs that benefit the most from crit, namely bards and monks. If you do not have any in your party, or the ones you do have are underperforming, you can simply give this to your best DPS once again. Moving on to more utility cards now, and we start with the Ur. This will place a 50 potency refresh on a party member that lasts for 15 seconds. This should total up to about 3000 MP at level 70. This card is very occasionally useful. The only party members you should ever really bother using this card on are the healers, and that is really only if you or your co-healer is struggling with maintaining their MP. Otherwise, the most appropriate thing to do when drawing the Ur is to channel it into Royal Road or Minor Arcana, or attempt to draw something else. You could maybe try and use it on your bard to get out some more faux Requiem, but I highly doubt that's worth it. And you shouldn't ever try and place this on a Dark Knight, as Dark Side prevents any MP regen effects, and Dark Knights have their own tools to regain their MP. And lastly, we have the Spire. This will regen the TP of your chosen party member for 15 seconds. This card is absolutely terrible, and you should just consider it as fodder for Royal Road or Minor Arcana. The TP you regain from this card is not very significant, and due to the changes to the roll action system and patch 4.4, all melee DPS should have access to Goad, and all ranged DPS should have access to Tactician, so there are better options available for restoring TP. Not to mention that the TP is only ever an issue when forced to perform AoE skills for too long. Where the Ur does have some merits, the Spire does not, and should be either used to channel Royal Road or Minor Arcana, or just discarded altogether. Having talked about the original 6 cards now, it is time to now discuss Royal Road. Royal Road will allow you to essentially take your currently drawn card and sacrifice its use to instead gain a Royal Road effect that will affect the next card you use. Royal Road does have a 15-second cooldown, and while it should theoretically be available for each draw usage, Sleeve Draw does throw a little wrinkle into that. So there may be times where you cannot Royal Road right away, so just keep that in mind. So what are the available effects that you can gain with Royal Road? Should you channel the Balance or the Bull, you will get the Enhanced Royal Road effect. This will increase the effect of your next card by 50%. If you channel the Arrow or the Spear, you'll get the Extended Royal Road effect. This will double the duration of your next card. And if you channel the Ur or the Spire, you'll get the Expanded Royal Road effect. This will have the effect of your next card, but in exchange will allow you to give the card's effect to all nearby party members. Now, when I made my guide back in Heavensward, I explained how I compared the different effects of Royal Road with the measurement of effectiveness. I know, super creative, but it does get the point across. So let's calculate that here again. We'll go ahead and use everyone's favorite card, the Balance, as an example. Should you use the Balance without any effects, it will have its original effect, which will last for 30 seconds. So we'll say that using this card this way, we'll be using the card at 30 effectiveness. Now, should you choose, you can now extend the use of the card with Time Dilation and Celestial Opposition. This will increase the card's duration by 25 seconds, and it will now become 55 effectiveness. Now let's take into account some Royal Road effects. Should we use the Balance with the Enhanced effect, we will now be increasing the potency of its buff by 50%. So now 30 seconds multiplied by 1.5 will now be 45 effectiveness. Should we choose to extend the Balance now, each second will be now multiplied by 1.5. So adding those 25 seconds to our already 30 seconds, the Balance now has an effectiveness of 82.5. Now let's try out the Extended effect. This simply acts as another time extension, so now doubling the duration of the Balance simply doubles its effectiveness to 60, slightly higher than the Enhanced Balance, but it's stretched out over double the time, which could leave more room for combat inactivity. If we further extend the Balance with Time Dilation and Celestial Opposition, again its simple addition now becomes 85 effectiveness. And now, things can get a little bit more complicated when we try to account for the Expanded Royal Road effect. First off, we do need to take into account that there are 2 different party sizes. Since we are now having the effect of the Balance, we can now calculate effectiveness by the total seconds of the card's duration given to everyone, and then multiplying that by 0.5. We'll look at light parties first, which consist of 4 people. If you take the Expanded Balance and can manage to ensure all 4 party members are receiving it, altogether each party member will be contributing half of a normal balance. Altogether, we can calculate that to 60 effectiveness. We can then extend the effects of these cards. We can give the Time Dilation to one of our DPS, which will increase the total effectiveness to 67.5. And now, with the Celestial Opposition, we can go ahead and extend all 4 cards by 10 seconds. This will increase our effectiveness to 87.5. This is only slightly higher than using the Balance with the other 2 effects. But now we can look at a full party, which does change things. If we hit all 8 party members with the Balance, that is a total of 240 seconds between all 8 people, which is 120 effectiveness. Now increase one of our DPS with Time Dilation, that goes up slightly to 127.5, and then extend all 8 party members with Celestial Opposition to add an additional 80 seconds total, and altogether we have an effectiveness of 167.5. Much higher than using the Enhanced or Extended Balance in terms of effectiveness. So let's recap. All of the numbers are on screen now, and if all that math wasn't very sensible, then in simpler terms, the Enhanced Royal Road effect is the weakest effect, but it is ideal for when you need to deal more damage in a shorter period. The Extended Royal Road effect is slightly better, but it has a longer duration. And the Expanded Royal Road effect, any light party is slightly better than that, on paper at least. The Expanded Royal Road effect in a full party does seem to be the best option. Now of course, this is all really just how things are in a vacuum and on paper, especially when it comes to the expanded Royal Road effect. The expanded Royal Road is really only useful when using offensive cards. You could make an argument for the Bull, but in most situations, the Bull would not be necessary on the entire party. You must also remember that we are counting healers into the effectiveness calculations, and even if you are a healer who will apply DPS when you don't need to heal, you will still ultimately have to spend a good portion of a fight healing, and will be unable to take the benefit of the balance in this case. The arrow and the spear do have some effect on your healing at least, but since we're using the balance for this example, it does nothing to improve your healing capabilities. Ultimately, each Royal Road effect has its uses. Even the enhanced Royal Road effect that is quote-unquote the worst effect still is extremely powerful. The enhanced and extended effects are particularly great when you have 1 or 2 DPS who are performing far above everyone else for you to focus your cards on. The expanded effect is okay in a light party, and it is extremely powerful in a full party as long as the entire party is performing their jobs adequately. Now, we spent a little while on Royal Road and even had a little math session there, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about a few other things before we move on to role actions. The next thing I want to discuss is Minor Arcana. Like I mentioned earlier, Minor Arcana allows you to access 2 new cards that were added in Stormblood. In order to gain access to these cards, you must channel your currently drawn card into the Minor Arcana ability. Once you do this, Minor Arcana will be replaced with either the Lord of the Crowns or the Lady of the Crowns. Similarly to Spread, you can keep whichever card you obtain indefinitely until you decide you want to use it. Minor Arcana will cool down once the card has been used, but it only has a 1-second cooldown now. Let's talk about the 2 available cards that you can get through Minor Arcana. The Lord of the Crowns is a single target damage ability that will deal 300 potency to the target. This is fairly straightforward. It deals damage. You really shouldn't have any issue finding a place to use this. Usually I almost immediately end up using it myself. I suppose if you really want to, you could save it in case there might be a certain phase where you might want the extra boost in DPS, but I never really end up holding onto this card for very long myself. The Lady of the Crowns is a single target healing ability that will heal your target for 500 potency. Unlike the Lord, this card is worth holding onto. You can essentially keep this card as insurance in case you might need a quick heal and you don't have access to Essential Dignity or Light Speed. Now, when it comes to Minor Arcana, there really isn't much harm in holding on to either card for as long as you want. Should you happen to draw a card that you do not want to use, Spread, Royal Road, or you don't want to discard it either, you can quickly use whatever is in your Minor Arcana and replace it with whatever's in your draw slot rather than discarding the card. The only issue with doing this is if you have a preference for keeping either card, there is a 50% chance that you won't get it back. So in some cases, it might be better to simply discard the card instead. Which reminds me, I skipped over them earlier, but there is an ability to discard the card you've drawn, to discard the card in your Spread slot, or to get rid of your current Royal Road effect. It's a pain to fit them on your hotbar, but there will be occasions where you'll want to do these very things, so do find some place to put them. Next, I would like to return to Sleeve Draw. Sleeve Draw will automatically give you a random card in your Draw, Spread, and Minor Arcana slots, if there isn't something in those slots already. It will also give you a random Royal Road effect if you do not already have one. Sleeve Draw is particularly great for attempting to get the card you want for the moment. If you use Draw and Redraw and still don't get what you want, you can get rid of whatever is in your draw slot and try a third time with Sleeve Draw. Or, alternatively, you could draw something, use it, and then immediately draw again with Sleeve Draw. Again, you won't have to worry about Sleeve Draw overriding whatever you might have stored in your Spread or your Minor Arcana or whatever Royal Road effect you might have. These will not override those effects if you already have something you already like. If you want to only use this to try and get another decent card from your draw slot and only that, I'd consider that acceptable. Obviously, if you can manage to, it is the most benefit to try and get all 4 effects at once, but if you only need 1 or 2 effects, it is much better to use Sleeve Draw without just sitting on Sleeve Draw and potentially losing out on Sleeve Draw uses throughout a fight. I'd highly recommend trying to use Sleeve Draw immediately after draw. This keeps draw lined up nicely, especially with redraw, and if you don't end up using redraw with draw first, you'll have it available for Sleeve Draw and it will still be lined up fairly close to your next draw. I hope this isn't really confusing with how often I'm saying different abilities that all have the word draw in it, but there really isn't really a better way of explaining things. Now, one penultimate topic I'd like to bring up in this section is a rather important one to me, and that is to give your cards to good players, not jobs. What do I mean by that? Well, very simply, be keeping an eye on your party members and avoid giving your cards to those who are performing poorly. The way the math works out, when it comes to using your offensive cards, the more DPS a party member is doing, the more DPS they'll gain from a DPS buff. The less DPS someone is doing, the less they'll get out of the same buff. So give your cards to good players and not just the jobs that you'll assume are outputting the most damage. Now, to be fair, it's not always easy to tell who is doing the most DPS, I do get that. If you play on PC and have access to a parser, that can make things a little bit more simple by simply following the numbers. But if you do not want to use one or play on PS4 and don't have access to one, then the best way to determine if a DPS is performing well is to, well, pay attention to them. And that can sound exhausting, and if you are still new to the game or new to healing, it might not be a very easy task to pay attention to the smaller details while also trying to heal the party and keep up with your own job's mechanics. But perception is a huge part of being a good healer, and it's something you should practice. Ever since Stormblood has been introduced with the addition of job gauges, there is a lot of telltale information that you will not be able to see anymore that you previously could to tell you if someone is at least playing their job well on a basic level. Some of these cues are things such as buff maintenance and debuff maintenance. Simple things like heavy thrust, straight shot, twin snakes, etc. should be attempted to be kept up 100% of the time. Another thing to see is if they are applying their debuffs. There aren't many dots left in the game, so it's pretty easy to tell if a DPS is neglecting their one and only dot on a boss fight. Also paying attention to their rotation. If you're in the duty finder and you see a Dragoon without heavy thrust who is only using their full thrust combo over and over, I would generally avoid giving cards to them. Similarly, if there's a Black Mage using Fire 3 over and over again, I would still try to avoid giving cards to them. There's a lot of things that can let you know if a player is not performing well, and in that case, you would do well to try and focus your cards on the DPS who are doing well. And I really can't stress this enough. It is a huge pet peeve of mine to see Astrologians throw their cards to party members who aren't even playing their job right on a basic level. When it comes to the DF especially, there are many players who do not perform well, no matter what their reason may be. Maybe it's because they're new to the game, maybe it's because they're trying to learn a new job and they don't quite have a handle on it, or maybe they just don't care and they just want to press buttons. It really doesn't matter. If there are people who are not performing well, you should try to avoid giving your cards to them. One of the jobs I personally play a lot is the Bard, which does not generally deal the most DPS compared to the other jobs, but I've managed to out DPS 14 other DPS in Alliance raids before while playing Bard, just because I'm playing my job properly where others are not. This may come off of something as a personal peeve, but if there's anything I want you to take away from this guide, it is to please give your cards to good players who are doing well, and not to jobs who can output the most DPS, or the jobs whom I said I prefer to give certain cards to, or even to your friends. I just ran a dungeon the other day where the Astrologian kept giving all the cards to his Dragoon buddy, and I was still outperforming him on my Samurai without any cards, which makes no mathematical sense, but look, just please, give cards to good players who are doing well. Heck, even if the tank happens to be doing more DPS than the DPS, which it happens sometimes, I've been in runs where it happens, I would still give my cards to the tank over the DPS in that situation. And you know, when you're playing with random people through the duty finder especially, you're going to run into all sorts of people with varying levels of skill, so it happens, alright? Sometimes you get DPS who don't know what they're doing, you get players who don't know what they're doing, and just try to pay attention as best as you can so that you can make the most out of your cards. When it comes to Astrologian, you draw the cards, you hand them out, but it is actually on your party to make the most of those cards. So try to give them to the party members who will make the most of those cards. And that is the end of the section, and in this case, the end of the video. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Again, this is just a small part of the full Astrologian guide that I am currently working on. Hopefully that guide should be done within a couple of days and should be up on the channel. If it is already finished and you're watching this video right now, then it should be in the description of the video, or you can click the eye icon on the top right of the video and it should be listed there as well. So if you enjoyed this section of the guide, go ahead and watch the full guide. And before you do that though, Do make sure to leave a like and comment if you have any feedback you'd like to give. Hopefully this was enjoyable, and if you are new to the channel, then hopefully this is a good introduction for you to go ahead and see other content that I've posted. So I already have a White Mage guide, and hopefully should have the Astrologian guide out soon, if not already. So go ahead and check those out, and if you like what you see, consider subscribing. I appreciate the support. So thank you all again for watching if you made it this far into the video. Hopefully you learned something and were willing to check out the full guide when it is finished. So yeah, I guess I'll see you guys there in the full guide. So until then, sayonara, bye bye. Obviously, if you can manage to, it is beneficial to try and get the most out of Sleeve Draw by trying to get all 4 of its effects benefits at once. That did not make any sense. Good job, I just ruined this entire take. Fantastic.